Good morning. This is Jason Dean back at it again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 10:42 on a Monday. So I hope everyone's doing good. This is the continuation of my coverage of each episode for True Detective Season 1. This is going to be about episode 4. Again, like I've said many times, this is my all-time favorite show, and I feel like there can never be enough things said about this show. And I've talked about this show a ton of times. I know I have at least two other Film Fanatic videos on this show. But earlier in the week, I had this idea. I was craving to watch it yet again, and I finished it last night. I had this idea of like, man, I want to talk about the show, but how can I do it in a different way? So what I decided to do, which I haven't done before, and it's the first time that I've done this kind of coverage uh, for for technically a television show, even though I feel like this is really a movie. The idea that I had, which I thought was kind of good or kind of original, I think, and a new way to dive into this series, was to cover each episode. So that's what I'm doing. I am now on episode 4. The premise for this story and episode 4 is Marty is faced with marital problems. They really dive into Marty's character or Martin's character in the series at this point, where you really see, played by the great and amazing Woody Harrelson. Woody Harrelson, you really see how kind of fucked up he is as a human being, and he's like a total womanizer. He's totally narcissistic. He's in total like, if you want to call it like midlife crisis mode, and he's got a drinking problem, and his life is kind of in a pile of shit. And they start in this episode. You really see kind of the darkness that he is, living in. And that's the thing that I love about this show is again it like all of the characters, especially when it comes to Russ and Marty. Russ played by the amazing Matthew McConaughey, who is just he should have gotten an Academy Award for the show. I feel like the thing that's so amazing about their characters is just like I for me I like care about everything that they're doing and saying, and I really want them to kind of prevail and to kind of pull through all of this, all of these incredible. I mean, they're at such odds all the time, and I just see how they have hurdle upon hurdle in front of them, and emotionally they have so much stuff that they're going through, and they are not, they're kind of bad men, they're kind of bad people, but they also have this like code of ethics, if you will, and they do believe in justice. So, and that's the thing I love about the show is that they're so messy and dark and kind of twisty, but but they have these amazingly positive attributes where even though that's happening and you're seeing these things of where they're kind of doing these really questionable things and horrible things, you want to see them prevail. Like you care about them and you develop a love for them, and that's the testimony to the writing of this show. So like again, like I said, Nick Pizzolatto wrote the show, who I think is a I don't know a literary genius. So this episode it dives into all of the problems and all of the terrible things that Marty's doing in his marriage. The search for Reggie Ledoux, who is a new character who emerges in this series, who is at one point is looked at as kind of the prime suspect. for all of these murders and crimes. The search for Reggie Ledoux leads to the detectives to a motorcycle gang called the Iron Crusaders, which Rust worked undercover in his past. The other thing that's really awesome about this episode is that it really goes into Rust's kind of backstory. He worked before he arrived where he's at, where he's currently this detective on this, insane case. He his background was he worked in narcotics, and he was a deep under deep cover. But he along the way he became a drug addict himself and really just went into the gutter. His daughter had died, and his marriage dissolved because of it, and he just became a total drunk and alcoholic. So it goes into that backstory. And so when he was, earlier in his life, when he was, in deep undercover working in narcotics, he was in the business of, basically swimming with the sharks constantly. His mission at that time was he was working on infiltrating like drug cartels. And so, but he retained some connections through that past journey. And there's two things about this series, or about this episode, which I think are just incredible. I don't know, it might almost be the best episode in some ways. But one of the coolest aspect of this story, of the entire show, is that it gets into kind of the occult element behind the aesthetics, particularly around the killer. The killer is starting to be referred at this point to the King in Yellow, after where Marty and Rust are interviewing a series of different possible witnesses, and they refer to this guy as this giant who is the king in yellow, and they start introducing these, occult elements of where they have these elements of kind of Gnosticism, voodoo, elements of the voodoo religion, also various kinds of occult, Satanism, even though it has nothing to do with Satanism. They introduce these occult elements, and there's all these references to the killer being referred to as the King in Yellow. And the King in Yellow was actually a book that was written. It's a short story that was written by Robert Chambers, and it's a short story. And there's all these references to the King in Yellow. It's basically a story about this devil who kind of reigns in this netherworld, and he is kind of this demon or devil incarnate. And so Nick Pizzolatto took from that book, or that short story. It's a short story. It's really, really good. I'm going to do a special show also with this series, of where I'm going to just talk about the King in Yellow, because it's really great. I've read it and I have a copy of it, and it's really great. It's really kind of like, it's really plays out like just really great horror writing. It's very, it's a short story. And the other references that they take from, that Nick Pizzolatto took from this short story, The King in Yellow, is the Carcosa. You hear that mentioned a lot, and Carcosa is also kind of the a key component or part of the King in Yellow. The King in Yellow kind of rules in this underworld, or in hell, if you want to call it that. That's referred to as Carcosa. And you hear that referenced a lot in the show, and especially in this episode. And Carcosa is basically the French word for the underworld. or hell. So there's a lot of great references to this great short story by Robert Chambers, which I really recommend any horror fans. I think people who really love H.P. Lovecraft's work would really love this story. It's really great, but it's a short story, and it's really interesting how they tied in those elements, how Nick Pizzolatto pulled those elements to kind of create this this evil incarnate monster. Very, very cool. The other thing that is super awesome in this show, in this episode, is when Rust decides to go undercover to kind of infiltrate Reggie Liddell and to try to basically dive into Reggie Ledoux, when he decides to track him down, Reggie Ledoux, they find out that he is essentially a meth dealer, drug dealer, but he only supplies and he only cooks his drugs for this motorcycle gang called the Iron Crusaders, and so he infiltrates this group, and it's the whole sequence of where he is being pulled in undercover to get this information is just amazing. It's the action in this sequence and the intensity is just unbelievable. It was all shot to the other thing from a technical perspective. It was all shot in one take, as far as from what I gather, and it is some of the most electrifying action that I've ever seen, and it is so fucking intense and balls to the wall. It's jaw dropping. And it's amazing how it's all shot in one. It kind of reminds me of the classic opening sequence to Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. Just one long panning shot, in with exteriors and interiors. And it's just one of the most perfectly executed action sequences, and it's unbelievable. Yeah, so episode 4 is just incredible. So stay tuned for episode 5 for True Detective, because again, and the name of this episode is called Who Goes There. Can't recommend this series enough. So stay tuned for episode 5. Peace.